A few days ago, I was checking the news when I came across an article on the BBC website. London's West End has been lit up with 30,000 lights to mark the holy month of Ramadan. The lights were switched on by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is one of the 1.3 million Muslims in London celebrating Ramadan. In the first instance, it felt good. The Western world is celebrating the Muslim month of Ramadan. That is, right there, cultural diversity and inclusion. I genuinely felt a sense of joy seeing British Muslims happy snapping photos with the lights being included and celebrated.
It's not only in UK, but also in other Western countries. Let's take for example US and Canada. Here we have hundreds of Muslims were able to pray in Times Square for Ramadan. Same as they pray in the streets with megaphones in their home Islamic countries, because it is their country and they are the majority. They did the same in New York Times Square. They are freely praying with megaphones and eating in the street.
Times Square is one of the hearts of the entire world. Tourists from so many countries come over here, hundreds of countries that come over here. So we wanted the beauty, the tranquility, the peace of the Quran to land on their ears and their hearts, and for them to hear about the Quran for the very first time. And what better time to do it than the month of Ramadan, which is starting tonight.
Muslims around the world are marking Eid al-Adha today, and those living in Toronto are no different. Thousands gathering at Woodbine Park to give thanks and celebrate. Thousands stand side by side, starting the day with prayer on a Muslim celebration which happens twice a year. This family celebrating Eid al-Adha moved to Toronto just a month ago from Saudi Arabia. Are you surprised to see Eid celebrated in such a grand scale here in Canada?
Yes, we are surprised from that. Yeah, we didn't expect it.
It makes you feel like you're right in home. You're right in home. You're right in home.
That's how any minority should feel and should be treated. And here we go, the Muslim minority in the UK is being celebrated and their culture appreciated. But right then, in that moment, I also started feeling a sense of discomfort. It was almost like a trauma trigger for me. So I pondered, what is it within me that feels uncomfortable? And why didn't it just end with the sense of joy that I had a moment ago? I started getting flashbacks to the time when I was still growing up in Egypt and experiencing Ramadan during my childhood and teenage years. Back there, it was a Muslim majority and I was from the Coptic Christian minority. Ramadan was unfortunately shoved down our throats. Even though I am Christian, I couldn't eat out in public. By social pressure, threatening looks from others and the use of abusive words, we Christians were unable to eat on the street during Ramadan. On one particular occasion during my late teen years, a couple of guys tried to intimidate me because I dared to eat in public. I gathered my courage and with a shaky voice I tried to object. I'm not Muslim, you know, I'm Christian. They aggressively shouted back at me, but you are in a Muslim country. Respect the majority that you live with, you friggin' infidel. Now I see why I felt the sense of discomfort reading the BBC news of Muslim celebrations in London. Right there, it slapped me on the face. It is one thing when Muslims are in the minority and totally another thing when it's a Muslim majority. It's a double standard. So was that a unique picture that I experienced in Egypt? Not really, far from unique. It is the standard picture when Muslims become the majority in any country. Take Iraq, for example, not only practicing social pressure to force on fasting during Ramadan, but it is the actual law that you have to fast during Ramadan, at least in public. It is not a matter of choice or a community standard. It is actually against the law to eat in public during the holy month. The same thing applies to many Muslim countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, the Western world is completely oblivious to these details. For instance, here is what the Australian government says on their official website, warning Australians going to Muslim countries during the month of Ramadan. Quote, in some countries, it is illegal to eat or drink in public during Ramadan, even if you're not fasting. Tourists have been deported in the past for eating in public during the fasting hours. In places where it is legal, it could still be considered offensive or insensitive, regardless of the law. In some places, even chewing gum or smoking in public are considered taboo during the fasting hours. End quote. The sad reality is that Muslims around the world, especially when they are in the minority, They want to be considered for their culture, included as part of a diverse society. But when it is Muslim majority, you find no acceptance of other cultures or anything other than Islamic values. Take Kuwait as an example. Not only that it is illegal to eat in public during Ramadan, but it is also illegal for Christians to celebrate or promote their culture and festivities in an equal fashion. In particular, 2023, as it happened for the Easter break and the Passover to coincide with the month of Ramadan, Kuwaiti authorities have enforced the removal of any Easter or Passover business deals being promoted or publicly announced. Shops are forced to remove all signage that promotes Easter and Passover deals, while at the same time, extra police has been deployed to catch anyone who is eating in public during the month of Ramadan.
So, what does it look like for the minority in Muslim countries? Does Christians allowed to use megaphone and pray outside the church walls as well? Do they feel home in their own countries and they are treated equally, same as the Muslims? The examples that you are about to see will shock you.
Answering most of the questions I get regarding my stay here, had a question like, how do I go to church? I've always had to explain to people that this place is a core Islamic country. And when I still say that, somebody still go on to ask me, what do I mean? Am I saying that churches don't exist here? The thing is this. When a country is a core Muslim country, it means that churches are not allowed. Other religions are not allowed. Just like Hindus, Bundus, name them, they don't have to. It's not as if that you cannot practice what you believe in, but there is no an existing institution where people can gather together, or where a group of people that believe in a particular thing can come together and worship. You can worship in your home, you can worship in your private closets.
My name is Jeswin James Baby. I was born and brought up in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, Christianity is banned. Only Islam is allowed to be practiced in Saudi Arabia. No other religions are allowed. It is a tough place to be a Christian. And without the secret church that I was involved in Saudi Arabia, I would not be a Christian here or talking to you now. So we have secret churches there, house churches, and we have a room which we dedicate for these church services. Christian television has been really, really effective in Saudi Arabia since the early 2000s. This is because in a persecuted country, we don't have much information about the wider Christian world because of the nature of our community and because of persecution in Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, which has about 1.5 million Christian residents, all of which are foreign workers, is the only Gulf country which bans the building of churches in its territory, and in fact forbids Christians to hold religious services anywhere, in public or in private homes. Until recently, this law was enforced, but in 2018, it was reported that the religious police had stopped enforcing it. It was reported on December 1st, 2018 by Egyptian and other Arab media that for the first time, a Coptic mass had been held in Saudi Arabia in the city of Riyadh. The religious services, led by Bishop Mokos, took place over 2 days, November the 30th to December the 1st, 2018, at the home of a member of the Coptic community who works in Riyadh. There are no churches in Saudi Arabia, Halim said.
Note here, the first mass took place in a private home.
So living in Saudi Arabia as a white woman and a Christian, I always felt, out of place. I always knew that there were people watching me because I stood out. I didn't wear a hijab. I never could quite figure out if that was more cultural or more religious, so I didn't wear the hijab, and that made me stand out.
It was interesting being an American over there, good and bad. Being a Christian in a place like Saudi Arabia was probably the most adversity that I've ever faced. Just knowing that we were kind of being watched to make sure that we didn't spread our faith too much.
The King of Saudi Arabia gave $10 million to Harvard University and $10 million to Georgetown to open up chairs of Islamic studies for the sake of understanding Islam and creating more understanding. I think it's a great idea. If they've got the money and want to do it, great idea. The New York Times journalist said to him in January 1 issue of 2006, she looked at him and said, "So understanding is what you seek?" He said, "Yes." "Are you going to open a chair of Christian studies in Saudi Arabia?" He said, "No, we don't have any Christians in Saudi Arabia." She said, "Isn't that the point? If you want people to understand one another, and you don't understand the Christian worldview, why do you want the Christian to understand the Muslim worldview?"
That is the sad reality and the double standard in the Muslim world. They treat all other cultures and minorities in a fashion that when they experience themselves as a minority in the Western world, they scream out loud Islamophobia and racism. A bit by bit, it started to be loud and clear to my senses as to why I felt a sense of discomfort and even a hint of fear when I saw the London celebrations of Ramadan. It is not because I'm an Islamophobe or because I'm against diversity and inclusion. Quite the opposite. But it is because I believe that democracy is a two-way road and that democracy can be its own enemy sometimes. I believe that intolerance should not be tolerated. I believe in treating others how I want to be treated. And it is time for the Muslim world to understand that diversity and inclusion is also a two-way road. And if that they want to be included, appreciated, and accepted in the Western world, they also have to show a similar fashion towards all other minorities that they host in their Islamic countries, including their own non-Muslim citizens, whom they don't have equal rights. It is time for the Muslim world to practice what they preach. Perhaps you need to show us practically, in reality, that there is no compulsion in religion, instead of pulling it out of the Quran every time we question your injustice and intolerance towards others in your Islamic states. Assalamu alaikum is not a greeting, it is a way of life.